So my name is Bryan Wilder. I'm a PhD student at Harvard University. And like Matt mentioned, this work is about a clinical trial of an AI-augmented intervention for HIV prevention. And so I'm going to start out by introducing the general domain that we're working in, and which is network-based interventions. And so this is a really kind of common template in domains like public health or international development, where we try to disseminate information or change people's behavior using social influence. So interventionists will recruit advocates from within whatever community they're working with to try to influence the behavior of the people around them as it relates to some health challenge. So this kind of template is used pretty commonly in health and international development. And now I'm going to introduce the particular domain that we're working in, which is HIV prevention for youth experiencing homelessness. And this is a huge challenge in the US in particular, and especially in Los Angeles, where we did the study. There's about 6,000 youth experiencing homelessness at any given time. And youth in this group have about 10 times the rate of HIV prevalence compared to the general population. So drop-in centers will conduct educational interventions where they try to recruit peer leaders from among the population of homeless youth to raise awareness about HIV and about prevention strategies. And this raises a computational question, which is connected to the literature around influence maximization in theoretical computer science and AI. So the idea here is that I want to recruit the most effective possible set of peer leaders, the people that are going to have the most impact on the rest of the population. And so we can formalize this by writing down a graph that describes the structure of the social connections between people and the population. And then I'll have an objective function that describes for a given set of peer leaders the expected number of other people in that group that will be reached if those are the people that I select. And so now I have some budget for the total number of peer leaders that I can recruit, and I'd like to find the most influential set of peer leaders overall. So there's a lot of work in the computer science literature developing algorithms for influence maximization in different kinds of models for how that information diffusion might occur. But by and large, this work tends to assume that you know the underlying model for information diffusion exactly. And so someone tells you precisely what the structure of the graph is, who's connected to who. They tell you the probability that any one person will talk to another person. And all of that we found just doesn't really exist in a community health setting. There is no data set that looks like that. No one tells you to start with who's connected to who. And so to produce algorithms for influence maximization that can actually be deployed in the field in this setting, we need to deal with these sorts of questions, right? We need algorithms that work when we don't know exactly how influence propagates, the probability that any one person will talk to another. And we need to deal with the fact that even gathering the structure of the social network itself, figuring out who's connected to who, requires in-person surveys where you go and actually ask people to tell you about their social connections. And that's enormously expensive and effort intensive. It requires easily a week of work for the social workers to go out and do this for a given population. So over the course of this project, we worked together with our social work partners to develop and deploy algorithms that address these issues. And so we conducted a controlled trial that enrolled about 700 youth over the course of a couple of years in Los Angeles. And we used this trial to demonstrate a statistically significant improvement in the intervention's impact when it's targeted with the algorithmic approach that we developed compared to the status quo techniques in public health. And so to our knowledge, this provides the first real-world trial for an algorithmic approach to influence maximization in a public health setting. Here's the outline for the rest of the talk. I'm going to start out by providing an overview of the algorithmic approach that we take very briefly. And then I'm going to talk about the design of the trial, the results, and the lessons that we learned over the course of the project. And so when I say brief, it's really just this one slide. There's plenty of detail in other papers about the algorithms if you're interested. Basically, the system that we developed called Change has these successive components. We're going to start out by trying to map out the structure of the social network. And like I mentioned, this requires these face-to-face surveys that's extremely expensive. And so what we want to know is how we can subsample the network, talk to just a limited subset of people, ask them for network information, and use that to locate influential nodes. And so we started out by developing a kind of theoretically backed algorithm for this with an approximation guarantee, and then quickly realized that the kind of theoretically sophisticated approach was too complicated to really deploy in practice. And so we simplified that algorithm down to kind of a more bare bones form, which is what's shown on the slide here, where we just successively sample a node at random, ask them who their neighbors are in the network, and then sample one of their neighbors uniformly at random as well. And the reason that this works is that neighbors of random nodes tend to have higher degree just structurally. And so that gives you access to higher degree nodes who report more information about the network as a whole. Then with that kind of partial view of the network, we need to select who we're actually going to recruit as peer leaders. And the challenge here now is that we already have only a partial view of the network. And then we have really no information about the actual probability that any one person will pass information on to another. And so we look for a robust solution, which is a set of peer leaders who will be influential and will be able to reach many others under a wide range of possibilities for what the true kind of model of information diffusion could look like. And so here we provide the first kind of polynomial time approximation algorithms for this class of robust optimization problems where the uncertainty that we're interested in is complex, quote, in the sense that you can't explicitly enumerate the set of all possibilities that you want to be robust with respect to. And so we use that algorithm then to power the final selection of peer leaders for the intervention. But like I said, I'm not going to go into any sort of significant amount of detail about the algorithms. Instead, I'm just going to move on to the kind of empirical process of, given that we have this algorithmic system, how do we actually evaluate it and see whether it provides an improvement over the kind of standard practice techniques in public health. So to assess these questions, we design a trial that has 3 arms. The first arm is interventions planned using the change algorithm that I just showed you. And then the second arm is degree centrality, which is the kind of standard approach in public health. This is just grabbing the most popular people to participate in the intervention, formally the set of nodes that have the highest degree in the social network. And then, so those 2 arms will receive interventions planned using different approaches. And then we'll have a third arm that's a control group. That's just observation only without any intervention at all. We conducted this trial in collaboration with 3 community agencies in Los Angeles. And so we ran a deployment of each arm of the study at each agency that participated. So for example, we first ran change at each of the 3 agencies, then degree centrality at each of the 3, then the observation only group at each of the 3. And this means that by the time we cycle back to a given agency in the process, there's been enough time, about 6 months or so, that the set of youth of that agency has essentially entirely turned over, which prevents kind of overlap between the groups in each deployment. Within each deployment, we have the following set of steps. We start out with a baseline survey where we enroll youth to participate in the study, about 80 of them per deployment, and then survey them for baseline behaviors and demographics. So this is, what they're doing, that's relevant to HIV spread just right now before the intervention. Then the intervention happens. We train about 10 to 12 peer leaders using the given method. And then we conduct follow-up surveys at 1 and 3 months where we bring back the original set of youth who were enrolled and survey them to see if their behavior has changed after the intervention. I'm going to focus on a set of 3 kind of key outcome variables here that are particularly relevant to HIV spread. So the first of these assess 2 really important risk behaviors related to condomless sex, so condomless anal and vaginal sex. And these are binary outcomes where we just ask youth, did they engage in these behaviors over the past month? We also assess their general knowledge about HIV transmission via a questionnaire and the percentage of questions that they get correct on it. So in our analysis then of this data, we want to test whether there's a statistically significant improvement in each outcome variable in an intervention group compared to the observation-only control group. So was there a benefit as a result of the intervention? And so we do this after controlling for a range of demographics, as well as the baseline rate of each risk behavior in a given population. So this is to even out and control for differences in the set of youth who just happen to be enrolled in each arm of the study. And then for binary outcomes, I'm going to present the results in terms of an odds ratio, which is maybe slightly more familiar for people in public health than computer science. But the kind of relevant thing here is that an odds ratio of less than 1 indicates improvement. It says that there was lower odds of some risk behavior after the intervention than there would have been in the absence of the intervention. So here's the key results showing each outcome variable for the 2 intervention groups. On the far right column, we find that both interventions do increase HIV knowledge by a kind of small but statistically significant amount. So this is saying that there's about a 4% improvement per month from enrolling in terms of percent of correct answers to that test from enrolling in one of these interventions compared to the control group. However, when we then look at behavior change, right, whether youth actually started doing something that materially reduces their risk of HIV transmission, we found that there are statistically significant improvements in the group with the algorithmically targeted intervention. So this is, that the odds ratios are less than 1, while there was no statistically significant improvement in the degree centrality group. And so this tells us that youth who were in the algorithmically targeted group had statistically significantly better outcomes than in the degree centrality group in ways that are really sort of highly significant for reducing HIV transmission. So now I'm going to wrap up by talking just briefly about some of the lessons that we learned over the course of the project, and that things that might generalize to other sorts of community health interventions. So the first thing is that that left out was that when we're designing algorithms, data is really a huge bottleneck. So just gathering the structure of the network is so expensive, and there's still lots of things that we don't know. And so a lot of the place where we got mileage out of trying to work on the algorithmic side of things was just trying to reduce the amount of information that we needed in order to make the project work. The second thing, though, is that regardless of what you do algorithmically, simplicity is really good. And this, I think, should be kind of a design goal that we keep in mind for algorithms in these and similar domains. And by this, I don't necessarily mean simplicity in the sense that what the algorithm is doing is sort of easily written down or explained. I mean that the algorithm doesn't require sort of very sophisticated interaction with the external world. It's okay if lots of things go wrong, if what the algorithm says to do is only sort of partially executed. It doesn't require lots of highly specific steps performed in sequence, because that's all randomness that provides the opportunity for things to just go wrong in a real community health setting. But then the final thing is that even if we have these kinds of algorithms lined up, a really sort of essential component of the intervention working in the first place is just community trust, right? We found it really helpful just to be proactive in explaining to the youth why we're asking them for this kinds of sensitive data, how it's going to be used, why we think it's going to benefit the community. And having that kind of buy-in is really important for this kind of participatory approach where we're recruiting peer leaders to work at all. And so to wrap up, I think the takeaway from this project is that AI offers a powerful way to improve community health and equity and access to health. But algorithm design is only the first step. It's that when we have all of these pieces that kind of successfully come together, that we have the opportunity to make an impact.